Chancellor Rachel Reeves is expected to unveil a major package of tax hikes and extra borrowing. The much-anticipated budget will also play a big part in setting the tone for British politics for the rest of the decade, perhaps, or at least 5 years. Here's Chancellor Reeves this morning outside number 11 Downing Street with her Treasury colleagues holding the iconic red ministerial box, something of a tradition on Budget Day, of course. She is the first female Chancellor of the Exchequer in the 800-year history of the position and is expected to set out about £35 billion in tax rises and spending cuts. Let's set you up for what we're going to hear from the Chancellor then with a quick check on where we are on markets. And this is the picture you see across UK gilts. We have the whole curve in focus here, and we see yields are coming down today. That has not been the story of the past month or so. Yields have been going up, partly in sympathy with what we've seen over in the United States, in contrast to what we've seen over the Channel, where yields the UK yield has been stretching over and increasing its spread over German bunds. But that has been the direction of travel until today, where we do see a little bit of a pullback in that, and we see these yields coming down. So coming down in the UK, they're actually either flat on the continent or even on the rise at the short end. But something of a contrast to the story of the past month we see there on that gilt German bund spread. Let's have a quick look at some other assets then in focus as we work our way towards the start of the budget. The pound then, as you see there, 129.58, down by 0.4%, a fairly sizable move. The FTSE 100, FTSE 250, we'll keep an eye on those. The construction sector, house builders could be in focus. Retailers could be in focus, of course, depending on what we hear from Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, later on. We'll also keep an eye on the AIM-listed stocks as well because of what she could do around inheritance tax. That was certainly part of the conversation we were having earlier on this morning. So with the stage set in terms of the data and the market positioning, let's bring in Bloomberg's Lizzie Burden, who's outside Parliament and can give us a brief update then, Lizzie, on what's at stake.
Well, Anna, Rachel Reeves is well aware of the history of this moment. She's set to compare this budget to the historic, famous Labour budgets of 1945, 1964, 1997, because this really is the moment to, as you say, change UK politics for the rest of the decade, to set out the change that people are going to vote on in 5 years' time. Now, even some Conservatives would agree that prioritising economic growth is the right thing to do. I was speaking to Lord Hammond, Philip Hammond, the former UK Chancellor of the Exchequer earlier. Take a listen to what he had to say.
I will certainly give them credit for it if they can achieve 2.5% economic growth. But that is not going to be an easy thing to do at all. And you're not going to do it by moving the goalposts so that you can borrow more money. That will give you a short-term fix, a sugar rush, if you like, but that is not the same as fixing the supply side of the economy, making this an attractive place for investors, for entrepreneurs, for wealth creators to locate themselves.
So he wants growth, but he does not want to sacrifice business in order to get it. Now, looking at the market perspective, you have seen gilts, as you say, by far the biggest gainers across major markets this morning. It hasn't been the story over the past week, but a settling this morning. The 10-year down 8 basis points currently. And so it seems that traders are pretty confident that Rachel Reeves is going to be fiscally prudent today. She's given herself 117 days of pitch rolling. It's the longest period to wait for a budget of her predecessors in at least half a century. And so today we will see whether she has managed expectations well enough when this is, let's note, one of the biggest borrowing plans on record, one of the biggest tax rising packages in history. So we're really going to be on the lookout, Anna, for any major spending surprises.
OK, and we've, of course, been trying to track down clues as to what the budget might include, and we've had some of those. Some of them will come to pass, others perhaps won't, and there will no doubt be some surprises. Briefly, Lizzie, what are we expecting to hear in terms of the measures?
Well, yeah, we've had a lot of leaks. Rachel Reeves has actually been told off for that by the Speaker of the House of Commons because, of course, when she speaks in Parliament today is meant to be the first time that we get these announcements, but she did not want to surprise the markets. They made some lofty promises in the run-up to the election. No return to austerity, no tax rises on working people. We'll find out today how far she's willing to stretch those definitions. We're expecting a rise in national insurance contributions for employers, rises in inheritance tax and capital gains tax. Remember, Labour said that they were not going to increase taxes that they hadn't announced in their manifesto. So let's see how much they stick to that promise. But the point is, she wants to fund day-to-day spending with tax revenue, and in the longer term she's going to change the fiscal rules so that she can borrow to invest. Add it all together, and as Philip Hammond said, the question is, does it bring growth? We'll get the new forecast from the Office for Budget Responsibility. Their target is 2.5%. If it amounts to a fiscal loosening, our economists say that the Bank of England is going to take longer to cut rates.
OK, let's get more on that subject. Bloomberg's Lizzie Burden, thank you very much for setting up the conversation. Joining us now as we count down to the budget then here in the UK, I'm joined by the Head of Economics and Government here at Bloomberg, Stephanie Flanders, and John Stepek from the Bloomberg Wealth team, who writes our daily award-winning newsletter, Money Distilled. Thank you both for joining us around the desk today. So, Stephanie, we were hearing there from Lizzie, and we have heard almost nothing else other than the mantra of growth from, well, I was going to say since they came into power, but before Labour were in power, that was the mantra. Do you think we are going to be left with the impression that this is a government that is singularly focused on growth today, or will something else be distracting us?
Well, as Lizzie was saying, there's a balancing act, isn't there? Because it's supposed to be focused on growth, but it's also got to fill the big black hole that's been discussed since Rachel Reeves walked into the Treasury, and it's supposed to be the end of austerity. So there's a lot of different things that she's balancing, and I think the big risk for Rachel Reeves is that the expectations are just set too high. I don't know whether one budget can command an entire parliament, change the political weather, solve all our economic problems, but that's almost what we've been led to expect. I'm going to be looking for quite a few key things. You know, one's always going through the Red Book, going through the analysis of the Office for Budget Responsibility, crucially. I will want to see what the overall balance, we know there's going to be tax increases, we know there's also going to be spending put into those very, very tight spending plans, and what the overall effect is judged to be on growth in the short term and the long term. It'll probably be a boost in the short term because we know in some sense they're putting money into the economy, doing more investment, and that will offset the rises in taxes. But longer term, does it increase the productive potential? And that's always a very difficult judgment for the fiscal watchdog, and I think will be key to judging the long-term success of this.
Yes, that's really interesting, isn't it? The time horizon over which you judge this is probably really important, isn't it? Because the OBR will give us their verdict. All economists will be trying to work out, do their own sums and do their own maths around this. But if invest is your mantra, some of that might take time to deliver.
Yes, the investment takes time, although I guess the benefit of having a really backlog system is that you have a lot of projects that supposedly have been waiting to go for a long time. We'll see if that pans out. Sometimes it doesn't. I think the crucial thing, particularly in the City of London, and when you think about what the gilt market reaction might be, we have got a lot of borrowing to do over the next couple of years, will be how she has chosen to raise, if it's 35 billion pounds in taxes, relative to the economy. That's not as large as some of the really big tax rising budget after COVID or after we left the European exchange mechanism in 1992. But if most of the money has been raised from things like national insurance, in effect reversing the national insurance cuts of the last year, I think that will be reassuring to people because it's spread across the economy rather than trying to get serious money from things like capital gains tax, inheritance tax, other loopholes, which A, may not raise the money because that money is very mobile, but also could really hurt entrepreneurship and the feeling in the city.
And John, this takes me on to your sort of 3 budget tests that you set out this week. So your sort of way of judging whether this is a good budget or not. And one of the things you mentioned there is pragmatism, and to Stephanie's point about whether it is a budget that's going to raise the amount of money that it needs to raise rather than just executing on some ideology, which might be some people's priority. But in terms of the economics, you'll be looking for some pragmatism.
Well, exactly. I mean, I think the balancing act is important, and I think part of that is tone, because as Stephanie's pointed out, there is a lot riding on this budget, probably more than it can bear. But one of those things is this actually the kind of closer to New Labour 2.0 that people perhaps voted for, or closer to somewhat more hard left, maybe even Corbyn-y, than people had started to worry about since they got into power. So I think that'll be something, the sense of, as I said, is it pragmatism or is it ideology? For example, good example of an ideological tax raise is arguably VAT on private school fees. Now, is that going to turn out to have been red meat for the hard left element of the party, or is it actually just one of many kind of more harder left policies that they adopt? I mean, my own expectation is that pragmatism probably will win out. I think that's really the only way to feasibly go. But we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah. And that was only one of the three tests you were mentioning. You want you'd like the tax system to be less complex. Well, fingers crossed. Let's see whether anybody ever delivers that one. But here's a bar that maybe this budget might it reach, not blowing up the gilt markets.
I mean, that should be easy. I mean, it should be easy to avoid that. It doesn't actually happen that often, despite the fact that, we've only got Liz Truss kind of like in the back of our minds now. And it really shouldn't happen, because at the end of the day, Liz Truss's budget blew up because, A, she was very fiscally aggressive at a time when the market was particularly perturbed, and also there was a great big structural problem in the gilts market in the form of LDI, which I don't want to get into right now.
No, we've all got post-traumatic stress from that one, haven't we? But that specific fragility then around defined benefit pensions, that's gone. Yeah.
That's gone. So, should be OK.
Definitely.
So
I just think, so what the insurance policies she's bought herself, at least when it comes to the gilts market, is this very tough, even though she's in effect loosening that debt rule, giving herself room to borrow more for investment, she's actually got a tighter version of the current spending rule, where she's forcing herself in every year to be only borrowing to invest, not borrowing for any spending. The crucial difference with Liz Truss is that she was announcing, without any fiscal oversight from the Office for Budget Responsibility, tax cuts that were going to be paid for with borrowing. And if you're not doing that, then you've already gone a long way. And I think you would still be looking at, as I mentioned before, the balance of tax increases. Where has she been pragmatic in where she's chosen to raise tax, or has she fallen for some of the sort of easy idea that you can just get more out of these very rich people who are very good at taking their money elsewhere?
Yes, and one of the things I think that maybe we've been getting drip-fed little bits of information about what might or might not be in the budget, but something we learned yesterday more concretely is about minimum wages and minimum wage going up. And that was something that was talked about a lot in the period of high inflation as to, what kind of impact was this going to have. It hasn't triggered so much conversation about what this does to inflation and people's propensity to spend in that group in particular.
No, I think where the conversation will be is if she is sort of effectively reversing the national insurance cuts, but in a way that particularly gives upfront costs onto employers and the employer contribution of a national insurance, and you have what was already this year you were already seeing quite a large increase in the living wage, and then this is adding to it, particularly at the young end. I think you will hear a chorus. I mean, she will have to just put up with the fact that a lot of small businesses will come out after this, particularly in the service sector and catering, and say this is a big one-step change in our costs. Relative to other parts of Europe, actually the amount of tax on work is still relatively low compared to somewhere like Germany. Well, you might say, Germany, it's almost half of the cost of employing someone is taxes, national insurance, all those things. So we wouldn't want to go in that direction necessarily, but I think we should keep it in perspective at long term, but short term businesses will see quite a big rise in their labour costs.
And John, what about the underlying performance of the UK economy at this point and how that's doing? I mean, we've got some PMI data for the month of October. We seem to be slowing quite quickly, but still above 50, which when you compare it across the channel doesn't look necessarily too bad. But what does that give to Rachel Reeves?
Well, it gives her quite a good backdrop. I mean, the UK economy has spent most of this year doing better than expected. So the nice thing is that if she can exploit the fact that we do have lots of longer-term problems, but if she can use the kind of short-term cyclical upturn that we've got, because that's basically what it is. I mean, the housing market is basically back to normal now. And as far as the UK consumer's concerned, that's basically what drives them. So as long as she doesn't scare the horses too much, and she's spent a lot of time pitch rolling.
Yes.
So if we don't come out with anything too drastic, then I think that that upturn should continue and give her a bit of breathing space.
And Stephanie, some have blamed perhaps some of that pitch rolling and maybe the negative tone of some of that for perhaps creating, I saw some of our economists referring to a vibe session, where the politics just sort of sounds quite negative and gets in the way of actually what might be a slightly more positive economic backdrop.
Yeah, I think we've started to see that roll back over the last couple of weeks. But you're right, we were actually looking at sort of business sentiment, consumer sentiments going in a quite strong negative direction since the election, and not in a way that reflects any kind of underlying change in the economic news. As John says, if anything, the news has got better economically, and yet businesses have become more gloomy, consumers have become less confident, and that does suggest that some of that really dark rhetoric about we're in a terrible hole, this is the worst legacy of any government ever, backfired to some extent. We'll see. I mean, these things tend to come out in the wash. What's most important is what happens in the rest of the world.
Yes, I'll just for viewers, we are, of course, bringing you live pictures of the Houses of Parliament and the House of Commons, the Prime Minister just standing up and then quickly sitting down again there. We were told we were getting the last question just a moment ago. It looks like people are shuffling around in their seats a little bit, and we might be preparing for the arrival of Rachel Reeves. We'll keep an eye, John, as we're watching these pictures, we'll keep an eye on all of the assets and how they perform through the budget. Of course, gilts will be to the fore, stocks to the fore. I'm thinking of small caps and AIM in particular here, depending on what she does with inheritance tax. That's been much talked about. I was talking to Peel Hunt this morning, very vocal on that subject. Yeah,
that's an important one. Obviously, AIM stocks have dropped a lot in advance of the budget, and that's purely because she might remove the IHT benefits on that. But that, we don't know if that will happen or not. If she does it without any kind of compensatory change to that, then that will be unpleasant for AIM. But we really just need to wait and see, because that's going to be, for most people, that's going to be just a detail. But for those companies in particular, it's going to be... that'll be hard.
But to your point, there, we'd simplify the tax system if you got rid of a few of these. There's been a panoply of reliefs and loopholes over the years.
Yes.
Corners of the tax system which have been abused by some.
We've got time to linger on that.
I do agree, Stephanie. I think that the difficulty is that at the same time we're trying to kind of encourage more money into the small bits of the city. And so if you don't do something else to offset the fact that essentially we've got this cottage industry that funnels money into AIM to avoid inheritance tax. And if that blows up...
That doesn't sound like it's adding to the productive potential of the economy, though.
Well, no, but if you're trying to encourage more small caps and more money into the kind of equity market, then you have to find some other way to do it if you're going to... If we're leaning against it all the time, because a lot of the time we are leaning against it. Like, get rid of stamp duty on shares, for example. That would help offset
I mean, it goes to a broader point, right? I bet one of the reasons they've brought out all these, they've had all these leaks, is they want the argument today and the discussion around the budget to be all big picture and lofty. She's given it because all the little things have already been announced. And every time we fall for it, every time we think that's going to be the case, and in fact, at the end we find ourselves still talking about the one or two unexploded bombs that were sitting in the Red Book. So we will be looking for them when she sits down.
Yeah, absolutely. And the OBR will have had a bit of time to digest this, won't they? And they'll give their verdict. And we're waiting to see what their assessment is about how much growth it creates. And then we'll all pour over details from the DMO, I understand, as well. Because even though gilt yields have been rising and the spread over bunds has been rising, a little bit of concern perhaps about the budget. There didn't seem to be a lot of certainty as to when the borrowing would fall.
No, I think that they will be looking for that, and obviously it's a sort of record amount apart from during COVID. Also, remember, there's going to be this interesting review that the OBR has done on whether or not they were misled in some way. The reporting by when we had that thing in the summer where Rachel Reeves said there's this whole, it's worse than we thought. There was some truth to that, because it did seem as though departments hadn't been given quite the right information. But we will now find out. OK, we will find out. Here is the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On July the 4th, the country voted for change. This government was given a mandate to restore stability to our economy and to begin a decade of national renewal. To fix the foundations and deliver change through responsible leadership in the national interest. That is our task, and I know that we can achieve it. My belief in Britain burns brighter than ever, and the prize on offer is immense. As my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, said on Monday, change must be felt. More pounds in people's pockets. An NHS that is there when you need it. An economy that is growing, creating wealth and opportunity for all. Because that is the only way to improve living standards. And the only way to drive economic growth is to invest, invest, invest. There are no shortcuts. And to deliver that investment, we must restore economic stability and turn the page on the last 14 years. This is not the first time that it has fallen to the Labour Party to rebuild Britain. In 1945, it was the Labour Party that rebuilt our country from the rubble of the Second World War. In 1964, it was the Labour Party that rebuilt Britain with the white heat of technology. And in 1997, it was the Labour Party that rebuilt our schools and hospitals. Today, it falls to this Labour Party, to this Labour government, to rebuild Britain once again. And while this is the first budget in more than 14 years to be delivered by a Labour Chancellor, it is the first budget in our country's history to be delivered by a woman. I am deeply proud to be Britain's first ever female Chancellor of the Exchequer. To girls and young women everywhere, I say, let there be no ceiling on your ambition, your hopes, and your dreams. And along with the pride that I feel standing here today, there is also a responsibility to pass on a fairer society and a stronger generation to the next generation of women. Madam Deputy Speaker, the party opposite failed our country. Their austerity broke our National Health Service. Their Brexit deal harmed British businesses. And their mini-budget left families paying the price with higher mortgages. The British people have inherited their failure. A black hole in the public finances. Public services on their knees. A decade of low growth and the worst parliament on record for living standards. Let me begin with the public finances. In July, I exposed a £22 billion black hole at the heart of the previous government's plans. A series of promises that they made but had no money to deliver. Covered up from the British people, covered up from this House. The Treasury's reserve, set aside for genuine emergencies, spent 3 times over just 3 months into the financial year. Today, on top of the detailed document that I have provided to the House in July, the government is publishing a line-by-line breakdown of the £22 billion black hole that we inherited. It shows hundreds of unfunded pressures on the public finances this year and into the future too. The Office for Budget Responsibility have published their own review of the circumstances around the spring budget forecast. They say that the previous government, and I quote, did not provide the OBR with all the information to them. About these undisclosed pressures that have since come to light, then their spring budget forecast for spending would have been, and I quote again, materially different. Let me be clear. That means any comparison between today's forecast and the OBR's March forecast is false. Because the party opposite hid the reality of their public spending plans. The very same budget, they made another £10 billion worth of cuts to national insurance. It was the height of irresponsibility, and they knew it, because they had run out of road and they called an election to avoid making difficult choices. So let me make this promise to the British people. Never again will we allow a government to play fast and loose with the public finances. And never again will we allow a government to hide the true state of our public finances from our independent forecaster. That's why today I can confirm that we will implement in full the 10 recommendations from the Independent Office for Budget Responsibilities Review. But the country has inherited not just broken public finances, but broken public services too. The British people can see and they can feel that in their everyday lives. NHS waiting lists at record levels. Children in porter cabins as school roofs crumble. Trains that do not arrive, rivers filled with polluted waste, prisons overflowing, crimes which are not investigated, and criminals who are not punished. That is the country's inheritance from the party opposite. But they had no plan to improve our public services, and they had no plan to put our public finances on a stable footing. Quite the opposite. Since 2021, there have been no detailed plans for departmental spending set out beyond this year. And their plans relied on a baseline for spending this year, which we now know was wrong, because it did not take into account the £22 billion black hole. The previous government also failed to budget for costs that they knew would materialise. That includes funding for vital compensation schemes for victims of two terrible injustices.
I just mentioned respecting colleagues. The public are watching. They want to hear what the Chancellor has to say. Simmer down.
I would politely suggest that honourable members listen to this, because it includes funding for vital compensation schemes for victims of two terrible injustices: the infected blood scandal and the Post Office Horizon scandal. The Leader of the Opposition rightly made an unequivocal apology for the injustice of the infected blood scandal on behalf of the British state. But he did not budget for the costs of compensation. Today, for the very first time, we will provide specific funding to compensate those infected and those affected in full. With £11.8 billion in this budget. And I am also today setting aside £1.8 billion to compensate victims of the Post Office Horizon scandal. Redress that is long overdue for the pain and injustice that they have suffered. Madam Deputy Speaker, the leadership campaign for the party opposite has now been going on for over 3 months. But in all that time, not one single apology for what they did to our country. Because the Conservative Party has not changed. But this is a changed Labour Party, and we will restore stability to our country once again. The scale and seriousness of the situation that we have inherited cannot be underestimated. Together, the hole in our public finances this year, which recurs every year, the compensation schemes that they did not fund, and their failure to assess the scale of the challenges facing our public services means that this budget raises taxes by £40 billion. Any Chancellor standing here today would have to face this reality. And any responsible Chancellor would take action. That is why today I am restoring stability to our public finances and rebuilding our public services. As a former economist at the Bank of England, I know what it means to respect our economic institutions. I want to put on record my thanks to the Governor of the Bank, Andrew Bailey, and to the Independent Monetary Policy Committee. Today, I can confirm that we will maintain the MPC's target of 2% inflation, as measured by the 12-month increase in the Consumer Prices Index. I want to thank James Bowler, the Permanent Secretary to the Treasury, and my team of officials. Madam Deputy Speaker, I would also like to thank my predecessors as Chancellor of the Exchequer for their wise counsel as I have prepared for this budget. In particular, I would like to thank the former Right Honourable Member for Spelthorne for his invaluable advice in this weekend's papers, where he concluded that his mini-budget, and I quote, wasn't perfect. Well, for once, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think him and I are in absolute agreement. Finally, I want to thank Richard Hughes and his team at the Office for Budget Responsibility for their work in preparing today's economic and fiscal outlook. Let me now take the House through that forecast. The cost of living crisis under the last government stretched household finances to their limit, with inflation hitting a peak of above 11%. Today, the OBR say that CPI inflation will average 2.5% this year, 2.6% in 2025, then 2.3% in 2026, 2.1% in 2027, 2.1% in 2028, and 2.0% in 2029. Next, I move on to economic growth. Today's budget marks an end to short-termism. So I am pleased that for the first time, the OBR have published not only 5-year growth forecasts, but a detailed assessment of the growth impacts of our policies over the next decade too. And the new Charter for Budget Responsibility, which I am publishing today, confirms that this will become a permanent feature of our framework. The OBR forecast that real GDP growth will be 1.1% in 2024, 2.0% in 2025, 1.8% in 2026, 1.5% in 2027, 1.5% in 2028, and 1.6% in 2029. And the OBR are clear. This budget will permanently increase the supply capacity of the economy, boosting long-term growth. Every budget, it might sound shocking to them, but this government is boosting long-term economic growth. Every budget that I deliver will be focused on our mission to grow the economy. And underpinning that mission are the 7 key pillars of our growth strategy, developed and delivered alongside business, all driven forward by our excellent Financial Secretary to the Treasury. First, and most important, is to restore economic stability. That is my focus today. Second, increasing investment and building new infrastructure is vital for productivity. So we are catalysing £70 billion of investment through our National Wealth Fund. And we are transforming our planning rules to get Britain building again. Third, to ensure that all parts of the UK can realise their potential, we are working with the devolved governments and partnering with our mayors to develop local growth plans. Fourth, to improve employment prospects and skills, we are creating Skills England, delivering our plans to make work pay and tackling economic inactivity. Fifth, we are launching our long-term modern industrial strategy and expanding opportunities for our small and medium-sized businesses to grow. Sixth, to drive innovation, we are protecting record funding for research and development to harness the full potential of the UK's science base. And finally, to maximise the growth benefits of our clean energy mission, we have confirmed key investments such as carbon capture and storage to create jobs in our industrial heartlands. Our approach is already having an impact. Just 2 weeks ago, we delivered an international investment summit, which saw businesses commit £63.5 billion of investment into our country, creating nearly 40,000 jobs across the United Kingdom. But we cannot undo 14 years of damage in one go. Economic growth will be our mission for the duration of this Parliament. Madam Deputy Speaker, in our manifesto, we set out the fiscal rules that would guide this government. I am confirming those today. Our stability rule and our investment rule. The stability rule means that we will bring the current budget into balance so that we do not borrow to fund day-to-day spending. We will meet this rule in 2029-30 until that becomes the third year of the forecast. From then on, we will balance the current budget in the third year of every budget held annually each autumn. That will provide a tougher constraint on day-to-day spending so that difficult decisions cannot be constantly delayed or deferred. The OBR say that the current budget will be in deficit by £26.2 billion in 2025-26 and £5.2 billion in 2026-27, before moving into surplus of £10.9 billion in 2027-28, £9.3 billion in 2028-29 and £9.9 billion in 2029-30, meeting our stability rule 2 years early. Monthly public sector finance data show that government borrowing in the first 6 months of this year was already running significantly higher than the OBR's March forecast. And so the OBR confirmed today that borrowing in this financial year is now £127 billion, reflecting the inheritance left by the party opposite. The increase in the net cash requirement in 2024-25 is lower than the increase in borrowing, at £22.3 billion higher than the spring forecast. Because of the action that we are taking, borrowing falls from 4.5% of GDP this year to 2.1% of GDP by the end of the forecast. Public sector net borrowing will be £105.6 billion in 2025-26, £88.5 billion in 2026-27, £72.2 billion in 2027-28, £71.9 billion in 2028-29, and £70.6 billion in 2029-2030. Madam Deputy Speaker, before I come to tax, it is vital that we are driving efficiency and reducing wasteful spending. In July, to begin delivering and dealing with our inheritance, I made £5.5 billion of savings this year. Today, we are setting a 2% productivity, efficiency and savings target for all departments to meet next year by using technology more effectively and joining up services across government. As set out in our manifesto, I will shortly be appointing our COVID Corruption Commissioner. They will lead our work to uncover those companies that used a national emergency to line their own pockets, because that money belongs in our public services and taxpayers want that money back. And I can confirm today that David Goldstone has been appointed as the chair of the new Office for Value for Money to help us realise the benefits from every pound of public spending. Today, I am also taking 3 steps to ensure that welfare spending is more sustainable. First, we inherited the last government's plans to reform the work capability assessment. We will deliver those savings as part of our fundamental reforms to the health and disabilities benefit system that my right honourable friend, the Work and Pensions Secretary, will bring forward. Second, I can today announce a crackdown on fraud in our welfare system, often the work of criminal gangs. We will expand DWP's counter-fraud teams, using innovative new methods to prevent illegal activity and provide new legal powers to crack down on fraudsters, including direct access to bank accounts to recover debt. This package saves £4.3 billion a year by the end of the forecast. Third, the government will shortly be publishing the Get Britain Working white paper, tackling the root causes of inactivity with an integrated approach across health, education and welfare. And we will provide £240 million for 16 trailblazer projects targeted at those who are economically inactive and most at risk of being out of education, employment or training, to get people into work and to reduce the benefits bill. Before a government could consider any change to a tax rate or threshold, it must ensure that people pay what they already owe. So we will invest to modernise HMRC systems using the very best technology and recruit additional HMRC compliance and debt staff. We will clamp down on those umbrella companies who exploit workers, increase the interest rate on unpaid tax debt to ensure that people pay on time, and go after the promoters of tax avoidance schemes. These measures to reduce the tax gap raise £6.5 billion by the end of the forecast. And I want to thank the Exchequer Secretary for his outstanding work on this agenda. Madam Deputy Speaker, I know that for working people up and down our country, family finances are stretched and paychecks don't go as far as they once did. So today I am taking steps to support people with the cost of living. It was the Labour government that introduced the national minimum wage in 1999. It had a transformative impact on the lives of working people. As promised in our manifesto, we asked the Low Pay Commission to take account of the cost of living for the first time. I can confirm that we will accept the Low Pay Commission recommendation to increase the national living wage by 6.7% to £12.21 an hour, worth up to £1,400 a year for a full-time worker. And for the first time, we will move towards a single adult rate phased in over time by initially increasing the national minimum wage for 18 to 20-year-olds by 16.3% as recommended by the Low Pay Commission, taking it to £10 an hour. A Labour policy to protect working people being delivered by a Labour government once again. Second, I have heard representations from colleagues across this House about the carers allowance and the impact of the current policy on carers looking to increase the hours that they work, including from the Honourable Members for Shipley, the Honourable Member for Scarborough and Whitby, and the Right Honourable Member for Kingston and Surbiton too. Carers allowance currently provides up to £81.90 per week to help those with additional caring responsibilities. Today I can confirm that we are increasing the weekly earnings limit to the equivalent of 16 hours at the national living wage per week, the largest increase in carers allowance since it was introduced in 1976. This means that a carer can now earn over £10,000 a year while receiving carers allowance, allowing them to increase their hours where they want to and keep more of their money. I am also concerned about the cliff edge in the current system and the issue of overpayments. My Right Honourable friend, the Work and Pensions Secretary, has announced an independent review to look at the issue of overpayments, and we will work across this House to develop the right solutions. Third, we will provide £1 billion from next year to extend the Household Support Fund and discretionary housing payments to help those facing financial hardship with the cost of essentials. Fourth, having heard representations from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, Trussell and others to reduce the level of debt repayments that can be taken from a household's universal credit payment each month by reducing it from 25% to 15% of their standard allowance. This means that 1.2 million of the poorest households will keep more of their award each month, lifting children out of poverty, and those who benefit will gain an average of £420 a year. Madam Deputy Speaker, our plan to make work pay will also protect working people. I know that the party opposite are deeply interested in our plans here. Having seen their colleagues repeatedly dismissed at short notice, I know that they are worried about their future under the Right Honourable Member for North West Essex. So they should rest easy, knowing that our plan will protect working people from unfair dismissal. It will safeguard them from bullying in the workplace. And it will improve their access to paternity and maternity leave. I hope that the new Shadow Cabinet will soon be grateful for these increased protections at work. It is right that we protect those who have worked all their lives. In our manifesto, we promised to transfer the Investment Reserve Fund in the Mine Workers' Pension Scheme to members. And I have listened closely to my honourable friends for Easington, Doncaster Central, Blanau Gwent and Ayr, Carrick and Cumnock on this issue. Today, we are keeping our promise so that working people who powered our country receive the fair pension that they are owed. Our manifesto committed to the triple lock, meaning spending on the state pension is forecast to rise by over £31 billion by 2029-30 to ensure that our pensioners are protected in their retirement. This commitment means that while working age benefits will be uprated in line with CPI at 1.7%, the basic and new state pension will be uprated by 4.1% in 2025-26. This means that over 12 million pensioners will gain up to £470 next year, up to £275 more than if uprated by inflation. The pension credit standard minimum guarantee will also rise by 4.1%, from around £11,400 per year to around £11,850 a year for a single pensioner. While I have sought to protect working people with measures to reduce the cost of living, I've had to take some very difficult decisions on tax. I want to set out my approach to fuel duty. Baked into the numbers that I inherited from the previous government is an assumption that fuel duty will rise by RPI next year and that the temporary 5p cut will be reversed. To retain the 5p cut and to freeze fuel duty again would cost over £3 billion next year. At a time when the fiscal position is so difficult, I have to be frank with the House that this is a substantial commitment to make. I have concluded that in these difficult circumstances, while the cost of living remains high, and with a backdrop of global uncertainty, increasing fuel duty next year would be the wrong choice for working people. It would mean fuel duty rising by 7p per litre. So I have decided today to freeze fuel duty next year, and I will maintain the existing 5p cut for another year too. There will be no higher taxes at the petrol. There will be no higher taxes at the petrol pumps next year. Madam Deputy Speaker, the last government made cuts of £20 billion to employees and self-employed national insurance in their final two budgets. These tax cuts were not honest. Because we now know that they were based on a forecast which the OBR say would have been materially different. It would have been materially different had they known the true extent of the last government's cover-up. Since July, I have been urged on multiple occasions to reconsider these cuts, to increase the taxes that working people pay and see in their payslips. But I have made an important choice today, to keep every single commitment that we made on tax in our manifesto. So I say to working people, I will not increase your national insurance, I will not increase your VAT, and I will not increase your income tax. Working people will not see higher taxes in their payslips as a result of the choices that I am making today. That is a promise made and a promise fulfilled. But any responsible Chancellor would need to make difficult decisions today, to raise the revenues required to fund our public services and to restore economic stability. So in today's budget, I am announcing an increase in employers' national insurance contributions. We will increase the rate of employers' national insurance by 1.2 percentage points to 15% from April 2025. And we will reduce the secondary threshold, the level at which employers start paying national insurance on each employee's salary, from £9,100 a year to £5,000. This will raise £25 billion per year by the end of the forecast period. I know that this is a difficult choice. I do not take this decision lightly. We are asking businesses to contribute more, and I know that there will be impacts of this measure felt beyond businesses too, as the OBR has set out today. But in the circumstances...
Order, Chancellor! Order!
Our constituents are watching. They need to be able to hear the Chancellor. Simmer down. Chancellor.
But in the circumstances that I have inherited, it is the right choice to make. Successful businesses depend on successful schools. Healthy businesses depend on a healthy NHS. And a strong economy depends on strong public finances. If the party opposite chooses to oppose this choice, then they are choosing more austerity, more chaos, more instability. This is the choice that our country faces too. As I make this choice, I know it is particularly important to protect our smallest companies. So, having heard representations from the Federation of Small Businesses and others, I am today increasing the employment allowance from £5,000 to £10,500. This means 865,000 employers won't pay any national insurance at all next year. And over 1 million will pay the same or less than they did previously. This will allow a small business to employ the equivalent of 4 full-time workers on the national living wage without paying any national insurance on their wages. Madam Deputy Speaker, let me now come to capital gains tax. We need to drive growth, promote entrepreneurship and support wealth creation, while raising the revenue required to fund our public services and restore our public finances. Today, we will increase the lower rate of capital gains tax from 10 to 18% and the higher rate from 20 to 24%, while maintaining the rates of capital gains tax on residential property at 18 and 24% too. This means the UK will still have the lowest capital gains tax rate of any European G7 economy. Alongside these changes to the headline rates of capital gains tax, we are maintaining the lifetime limit for business asset disposal relief at £1 million to encourage entrepreneurs to invest in their businesses. Business asset disposal relief will remain at 10% this year before rising to 14% in April 2025 and to 18% from 2026-27, maintaining a significant gap compared to the higher rate of capital gains tax. Together, the OBR say that these measures will raise £2.5 billion by the end of the forecast. In a sign of this government's commitment to supporting growth and entrepreneurship, we have already extended the Enterprise Investment Scheme and the Venture Capital Trust schemes to 2035. And we will continue to work with leading entrepreneurs and venture capital firms to ensure that our policies support a positive environment for entrepreneurship in the UK. Next, inheritance tax. Only 6% of estates will pay inheritance tax this year. I understand the strongly held desire to pass down savings to children and grandchildren. So I am taking a balanced approach in my package today. First, the previous government froze inheritance tax thresholds until 2028. I will extend that freeze for a further 2 years until 2030. That means the first £325,000 of any estate can be inherited tax-free, rising to £500,000 if the estate includes a residence passed to direct descendants, and £1 million when a tax-free allowance is passed to a surviving spouse or civil partner. Second, we will close the loophole created by the previous government, made even bigger when the lifetime allowance was abolished, by bringing inherited pensions into inheritance tax from April 2027. Finally, we will reform agricultural property relief and business property relief. From April 2026, the first £1 million of combined business and agricultural assets will continue to attract no inheritance tax at all. But for assets over £1 million, inheritance tax will apply with a 50% relief at an effective rate of 20%. This will ensure that we continue to protect small family farms and three-quarters of claims unaffected by these changes. I I can also announce that we will apply a 50% relief in all circumstances on inheritance tax for shares on the alternative investment market and other similar markets, setting the effective rate of tax at 20%. Taken together, these measures raise over £2 billion by the final year of the forecast. Next, I can confirm that the government will renew the tobacco duty escalator for the remainder of this Parliament at RPI plus 2%. Increase duty by a further 10% on hand-rolling tobacco this year, introduce a flat rate duty on all vaping liquid from October 2026, alongside an additional one-off increase in tobacco duty to maintain the incentive to give up smoking. And we will increase the soft drinks industry levy to account for inflation since it was introduced, as well as increasing the duty in line with CPI each year going forward. These measures will raise nearly £1 billion per year by the end of the forecast period. Madam Deputy Speaker, we want to support the take-up of electric vehicles, so I will maintain the incentives for electric vehicles in company car tax from 2028 and increase the differential between fully electric and other vehicles in the first-year rates of vehicle excise duty from April 2025. These measures will raise around £400 million by the end of the forecast period. Madam Deputy Speaker, let me update the House on our plans for air passenger duty. And I can see the right honourable gentleman's ears have pricked up. Air passenger duty has not kept up with inflation in recent years, so we are introducing an adjustment, meaning an increase of no more than £2 for an economy-class short-haul flight. But I am taking a different approach when it comes to private jets. Increasing the rate of air passenger duty by a further 50%. That is equivalent to £450 per passenger for a private jet to, say, California? Madam Deputy Speaker, let us now turn to our high street businesses. I know for them, a major source of concern is business rates. From 2026-27, we intend to introduce 2 permanently lower tax rates for retail, hospitality and leisure properties, which make up the backbone of our high streets across the country. And it is our intention that it is paid for by a higher multiplier for the most valuable properties. But the previous government created a cliff edge next year as temporary reliefs end. So I will today provide 40% relief on business rates for the retail, hospitality and leisure industry in 2025-26, up to a cap of £110,000 per business. Alongside this, the small business tax multiplier will be frozen next year. Next, I can confirm that alcohol duty rates on non-draft products will increase in line with RPI from February next year. But nearly 2/3 of alcoholic drinks sold in pubs are served on draft. So today, instead of uprating these products in line with inflation, I am cutting draft duty by 1.7%. Which means a penny off the pint in the pub. Alongside the changes I am making today, I am publishing a corporate tax roadmap, providing the business certainty called for by the CBI, the British Chambers of Commerce and the Institute for Directors. This confirms our commitment to cap the rate of corporation tax at 25%, the lowest in the G7, for the duration of this Parliament, while maintaining full expensing and the £1 million annual investment allowance, and keeping the current rates of research and development relief to drive innovation. Madam Deputy Speaker, in our manifesto, we made a number of commitments to raise funding for our public services. First, I have always said that if you make Britain your home, you should pay your taxes here too. So today I can confirm we will abolish the non-dom tax regime. And we will remove the outdated concept of domicile from the tax system from April 2025. We will introduce a new residence-based scheme with internationally competitive arrangements for those coming to the UK on a temporary basis, while closing the loopholes in the scheme designed by the party opposite. To further encourage investment into the UK, we will also extend the temporary repatriation relief to 3 years and expand its scope, bringing billions of pounds of new funds into Britain. The Independent Office for Budget Responsibility say that this package of measures will raise £12.7 billion over the next 5 years. Next, the fund management industry provides a vital contribution to our economy. But as our manifesto set out, there needs to be a fairer approach to the way that carried interest is taxed. So we will increase the capital gains rates on carried interest to 32% from April 2025. And from April 2026, we will deliver further reform to ensure that the specific rules for carried interest are simpler, fairer and better targeted. In our manifesto, we committed to reforming stamp duty land tax to raise revenues while supporting those buying their first home. We are increasing the stamp duty land tax surcharge for second homes, known as the higher rate for additional dwellings, by 2 percentage points to 5%, which will come into effect from tomorrow. This will support over 130,000 additional transactions from people buying their first home or moving home over the next 5 years. Next, we are committed to reform the energy profits levy on oil and gas companies. I can confirm today that we will increase the rate of the levy to 38%, which will now expire in March 2030. And we will remove the 29% investment allowance to ensure that the oil and gas industry can protect jobs and support our energy security. So we will maintain the 100% first-year allowances and the decarbonisation allowances too. Finally, 94% of children in the UK attend state schools. To provide the highest quality of support and teaching that they deserve, we will introduce VAT on private school fees from January 2025. And we will shortly introduce legislation to remove their business rates relief from April 2025 too. We said in our manifesto that these changes, alongside our measures to tackle tax avoidance, would bring in £8.5 billion in the final year of the forecast. I can confirm today that they will in fact raise over £9 billion to support our public services and restore our public finances. That is a promise made and a promise fulfilled. Madam Deputy Speaker, I have one final decision to take on tax today. The previous government froze income tax and national insurance thresholds in 2021, and then they did so again after the mini-budget. Extending their threshold freeze for a further 2 years raises billions of pounds, money to deal with the black hole in our public finances and repair our public services. Having considered this issue closely, I have come to the conclusion that extending the threshold freeze would hurt working people. It would take more money out of their payslips. I'm keeping every single promise on tax that I made in our manifesto. So there will be no extension of the freeze in income tax and national insurance thresholds beyond the decisions by the previous government. From 2028-29, personal tax thresholds will be uprated in line with inflation once again. When it comes to choices on tax, this government chooses to protect working people every single time. Madam Deputy Speaker, these are the choices I have made: to restore economic stability and to protect working people. The next choice I make is to begin to repair our public services. In recent months, we have conducted the first phase of the spending review to set departmental budgets for 2024-25 and 2025-26. And I want to thank my right honourable friend, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, for his tireless work with colleagues from across government. Because I have taken difficult decisions on tax today, I am able to provide an injection of immediate funding over the next 2 years to stabilise and to support our public services. The next phase of the spending review will report in late spring, and I have set the overall envelope today. Day-to-day spending from 2024-25 onwards will grow by 1.5% in real terms. And today, departmental spending, including capital spending, will grow by 1.7% in real terms. At the election, we promised there would be no return to austerity. Today, we deliver on that promise. But given the scale of the challenge that we are facing in our public services, that means there will still be difficult choices in the next phase of the spending review. Just as we cannot tax and spend our way to prosperity, nor can we simply spend our way to better public services. So we will deliver a new approach to public service reform, using technology to improve public services and taking a zero-based approach so that taxpayers' money is spent as effectively as possible, and so we focus on delivering our key priorities. In the first phase of the spending review, I have prioritised day-to-day funding to deliver on our manifesto commitments. I want every child to have the very best start in life, and the best possible start to the school day too. And I know my right honourable friend, the Education Secretary, shares my ambition. So I am today tripling investment in breakfast clubs to fund them in thousands of schools. I am increasing the core schools budget by £2.3 billion next year to support our pledge to hire thousands more teachers into key subjects. So that our young people can develop the skills that they need for the future, I am providing an additional £300 million for further education. And finally, this government is committed to reforming special educational needs provision to improve outcomes for our most vulnerable children and to ensure that the system is financially sustainable. To support that work, I am today providing a £1 billion uplift in funding, a 6% real terms increase from this year. There is no more important job for government than to keep our country safe, and we are conducting a strategic defence review to be published next year. And as set out in our manifesto, we will set a path to spending 2.5% of GDP on defence at a future fiscal event. Today, I am announcing a total increase to the Ministry of Defence's budget of £2.9 billion next year, ensuring that the UK comfortably exceeds our NATO commitments and providing guaranteed military support to Ukraine of £3 billion per year for as long as it takes. Last week, alongside my right honourable friend, the Defence Secretary, I announced in addition to this, further support to Ukraine, on top of our NATO commitment, through our £2.26 billion contribution to the G7's Extraordinary Revenue Acceleration Agreement, repaid using profits from immobilised Russian sovereign assets. And as we approach Remembrance Sunday, it is vital that we take time to remember those who have served our country so bravely. So I am today announcing funding to commemorate the 80th anniversary of VE and VJ Day next year, to honour those who have served at home and abroad. We must also remember those who experienced the atrocities of the Nazi regime firsthand. I would like to pay tribute to Lily Ebert, the Holocaust survivor and educator who passed away aged 100 earlier this month. I am today committing a further £2 million to Holocaust education next year, so that charities like the Holocaust Educational Trust can continue their work to ensure that these vital testimonies are not lost and are preserved for the future. Madam Deputy Speaker, to repair our public services, we also need to work alongside our mayors and local leaders. We will deliver a significant real terms funding increase for local governments next year, including £1.3 billion of additional grant funding to deliver essential services, with at least £600 million in grant funding for social care and £230 million to tackle homelessness and rough sleeping. We are today confirming that Greater Manchester and the West Midlands will be the first mayoral authorities to receive integrated settlements from next year, giving mayors meaningful control of the funding for their local areas. And to support our high streets, we are taking action to deal with the sharp rise in shoplifting that we have seen in recent years. We will scrap the effective immunity for low-value shoplifting introduced by the party opposite. And having listened closely to organisations like the British Retail Consortium and the trade union USDOR, I am providing additional funding to crack down on the organised gangs which target retailers and to provide more training to our police officers and retailers to stop shoplifting in its tracks. Finally, I am today providing funding to support public services and drive growth across Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. Having discussed the matter with the First Minister of Wales, Eluned Morgan, and my honourable friends for Llanelli and Pontypridd, I am today providing £25 million to the Welsh Government next year for the maintenance of coal tips to ensure that we keep our communities safe. And to support growth, including in our rural areas, we will proceed with city and growth deals in Northern Ireland, in Causeway Coast and Glens, and the Mid-South West. And we will drive growth in Scotland, a key priority for Scottish Labour and our leader, Anna Sawar, including with a city and growth deal in Argyll and Bute. This budget provides the devolved governments with the largest real terms funding settlements since devolution, delivering an additional £3.4 billion to the Scottish Government through the Barnett formula. Funding which must now be used effectively in Scotland to deliver the public services that the people of Scotland deserve. This budget also provides £1.7 billion to the Welsh Government and £1.5 billion to the Northern Ireland Executive in 2025-26. I said that there would be no return to austerity, and that is the choice that I have made today. Madam Deputy Speaker, to rebuild our country, we need to increase investment. The UK lags behind every other G7 country when it comes to business investment as a share of our economy. That matters. It means the UK has fallen behind in the race for new jobs, new industries and new technology. By restoring economic stability and by establishing the National Wealth Fund to catalyse private funding, we have begun to create the conditions that businesses need to invest. But there is also a significant role for public investment. For too long, we have seen Conservative chancellors cut investment and raid capital budgets to plug gaps in day-to-day spending. The result is clear for all to see. Hospitals without the equipment they need. School buildings not fit for our children. A desperate lack of affordable housing. Economic growth held back at every turn. Under the plans I inherited, public investment was set to fall from 2.5% to 1.7% of GDP. But in Washington last week, the International Monetary Fund were clear. More public investment is badly needed in the UK. So having listened to the case made by the former Governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, former Treasury Minister Jim O'Neill, and the former Cabinet Secretary Gus O'Donnell, among others, I am confirming our investment rule. As set out in our manifesto, we will target debt falling as a share of the economy. Debt will be defined as public sector net financial liabilities, or net financial debt for short, a metric that has been measured by the Office for National Statistics since 2016 and forecast by the Office of Budget Responsibility since that date too. Net financial debt recognises that government investment delivers returns for taxpayers. By counting not just the liabilities on a government's balance sheet, but the financial assets too. This means that we count the benefits of that investment, not just the costs. And we free up our institutions to invest, just as they do in Germany, France and Japan. Like our stability rule, our investment rule will apply in 2029-2030 until that becomes the third year of the forecast. From that point onwards, net financial debt will fall in the third year of every forecast. Today, the OBR say that we are already meeting our target 2 years early, with net financial debt falling by 2027-28, with £15.7 billion of headroom in the final year. So that we drive the right incentives in government investments, we will introduce 4 key guardrails to ensure capital spending is good value for money and drives growth in our economy. First, our portfolio of new financial investments will be delivered by expert bodies like the National Wealth Fund, which must, by default, earn a rate of return at least as large as that on gilts. Second, we will strengthen the role of institutions to improve infrastructure delivery. Third, we will improve certainty, setting capital budgets for 5 years and extending them at every spending review every 2 years. Finally, we will ensure that there is greater transparency for capital spending, with robust annual reporting of financial investments based on accounts audited by the National Audit Office and made available to the Office for Budget Responsibility at every forecast. Taken together with our stability rule, these fiscal rules will ensure that our public finances are on a firm footing, while enabling us to invest prudently alongside business. The capital plans that I now set out to drive growth across our country and repair the fabric of our nation are only possible because of our investment rule. Let me set out those investment plans. Today, we are confirming our plans to capitalise the National Wealth Fund to invest in the industries of the future, from gigafactories to ports to green hydrogen. Building on these investments, my right honourable friend, the Business Secretary, is driving forward our modern industrial strategy. Working with businesses and organisations like Make UK to set out the sectors with the biggest growth potential. Today, we are confirming multi-year funding commitments for these areas of our economy, including nearly £1 billion for the aerospace sector to fund vital research and development, building on our industry in the East Midlands, the South West and in Scotland. Over £2 billion for the automotive sector to support our electric vehicle industry and develop our manufacturing base, building on our strengths in the North East and the West Midlands. And up to £520 million for a new life sciences innovative manufacturing fund. For our world-leading creative industries, we will legislate to provide additional tax relief for visual effect costs in TV and film. And we are providing £25 million for the North East Combined Authority, which they plan to use to remediate the Crownworks studio site in Sunderland, creating 8,000 new jobs. To unlock these growth industries of the future, we will protect government investment in research and development with more than £20 billion worth of funding. This includes at least £6.1 billion to protect core research funding for areas like engineering, biotechnology and medical science. Through Research England, other research councils and the national academies. We will extend the Innovation Accelerators programme in Glasgow, in Manchester and in the West Midlands. And with over £500 million of funding next year, my right honourable friend, the Science, Technology and Innovation Secretary, will continue to drive progress in improving reliable, fast broadband and mobile coverage across our country, including in rural areas. We committed in our manifesto to build 1.5 million homes over the course of this Parliament. And my right honourable friend, the Deputy Prime Minister, is driving that work forward across government. Today, I am providing over £5 billion of government investment to deliver our plans on housing next year. We will increase the Affordable Homes Programme to £3.1 billion, delivering thousands of new homes. We will provide £3 billion worth of support in guarantees to boost the supply of homes and support our small house builders. And we will provide investment to renovate sites across our country, including at Liverpool Central Docks, where we will deliver 2,000 new homes, and funding to help Cambridge realise its full growth potential. Alongside this investment, we will put the right policies in place to increase the supply of affordable housing. Having heard representations from local authorities, social housing providers and from Shelter, I can today confirm that the government will reduce right-to-buy discounts and local authorities will be able to retain the full receipts from any sales of social housing so that we can reinvest them back into the housing stock and into new supply. By doing this, we will give more people a safe, secure and affordable place to live. We will provide stability to social housing providers with a social housing rent settlement of CPI plus 1% for the next 5 years. And we will deliver on our manifesto commitment to hire hundreds of new planning officers to get Britain building again. We will also make progress on our commitment to accelerate the remediation of homes following the findings of the Grenfell inquiry, with £1 billion of investment to remove dangerous cladding next year. The last government made a number of promises on transport, but it failed to fund them. Working with my right honourable friend, the Transport Secretary, I am providing funding for 11 new green hydrogen projects across England, Scotland and Wales. They will be amongst the first commercial-scale projects anywhere in the world, including in Bridgend, East Renfrewshire and Barrow-in-Furness. We are kick-starting the Warm Homes Plan by confirming an initial £3.4 billion over the next 3 years to transform 350,000 homes, including 250,000 low-income and social homes. And we will establish GB Energy, providing funding next year to set up GB Energy at its new home in Aberdeen. Overall, we will invest an additional £100 billion over the next 5 years in capital spending, only possible because of our investment rule. The OBR say today that this investment will drive growth across our country in the next 5 years and in the longer term increase GDP by up to 1.4%. It will crowd in private investment, meaning more jobs and more opportunities in every corner of the UK. That is the choice that I have made, to invest in our country and to grow our economy. Today, I am setting out 2 final areas in which investment is so badly needed to repair the fabric of our nation. Madam Deputy Speaker, my right honourable friend, the member for Lewisham West and East Dulwich and I joined the Labour Party because of the condition of our schools in the 1980s and the 1990s under Conservative governments. When we were at secondary school, my sixth form was a couple of prefab huts in the playground. My school, like so many others, was rebuilt by the last Labour government. But today, after 14 years of Tory government, progress has gone backwards. School roofs crumbling and millions of children are facing the same backdrop as I did. I will be the Chancellor that changes that. So today, I am providing £6.7 billion of capital investment to the Department for Education next year, a 19% real terms increase on this year. That includes £1.4 billion to rebuild over 500 schools in the greatest need, including St Helens Primary School in Hartlepool and Mercia Academy in Derby, and so many more across our country. And we will provide £2.1 billion more to improve school maintenance, £300 million more than this year, ensuring that all our children can learn somewhere safe, including dealing with RAC-affected schools in the constituencies of my right honourable friends for Watford, Stourbridge, Hyndburn and beyond. Alongside investment in new teachers and funding through thousands of new breakfast clubs, this government is giving our children and young people the opportunities that they deserve. Madam Deputy Speaker, I come to our most cherished public service of all, our NHS. My right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, is beginning to repair the damage of the last 14 years. In our first week in office, he commissioned an independent report into the state of our health service by Lord Darcy. Its conclusions were damning. While our NHS staff do a remarkable job, and we thank them for it, it is clear that in so many areas, they're moving in the wrong direction. 100,000 infants waited over 6 hours in A&E last year. 350,000 people are waiting a year for mental health support. Cancer deaths here higher than in other countries. It is simply unforgivable. In the spring, we will publish a 10-year plan for the NHS to deliver a shift from hospital to community, from analogue to digital, and from sickness to prevention. Today, we are announcing a down payment on that plan to enable the NHS to deliver 2% productivity growth next year. These reforms are vital, but we should be honest. The state of the NHS that we have inherited after, and I quote Lord Darcy, the most austere decade since the NHS was founded, means that reform must come alongside investments. So today, because of the difficult decisions that I have taken on tax, welfare and spending, I can announce that I am providing a £22.6 billion increase in the day-to-day health budget and a £3.1 billion increase in the capital budget over this year and next. This is the largest real terms growth in day-to-day NHS spending outside of COVID since 2010. Let me set out what this funding is delivering. Many NHS buildings have been left in a state of disrepair. So we will provide £1 billion of health capital investment next year to address the backlog of repairs and upgrades across our NHS. To increase capacity for tens of thousands more procedures next year, we will provide a further £1.5 billion for new beds in hospitals across our country, new capacity for over 1 million additional diagnostic tests, and new surgical hubs and diagnostic centres, so that people waiting for their treatment can get it as quickly as possible. My right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, will be setting out further details of his review into the new hospital programme in the coming weeks and publishing in the new year. But I can tell the House today that work will continue at pace to deliver those 7 hospitals affected by the RAC crisis, including West Suffolk Hospital in Bury St Edmunds and Leighton Hospital in Crewe. And finally, because of this record injection of funding, because of the thousands of additional beds that we have secured, and because of the reforms that we are delivering in our NHS, we can now begin to bring waiting lists down more quickly and move towards our target for waiting times to be no longer than 18 weeks. By delivering on our manifesto commitment for 40,000 extra hospital appointments a week, that is the difference that this Labour government is making. Madam Deputy Speaker, the choices I have made today are the right choices for our country. To restore stability to our public finances, to protect working people, to fix our NHS, and to rebuild Britain. That doesn't mean these choices are easy, but they are responsible. If the party opposite disagrees with the choices that I have made, then they must answer. What choices would they make? Would they again choose the path of irresponsibility, the path taken by Liz Truss, and ignore the problems in our public finances altogether? If that is their choice, they should say so. But let me be clear. If they disagree with my choices on tax, then they would not be able to protect working people. If they disagree with our plans to fund public services, then they would have to cut schools and hospitals. And if they disagree with our investment rule, then they would have to delay or cancel thousands of projects which drive growth across our country. This is a moment of fundamental choice for Britain. I have made my choices, the responsible choices, to restore stability to our country, to protect working people. More teachers in our schools, more appointments in our NHS, more homes being built, fixing the foundations of our economy, investing in our future, delivering change, rebuilding Britain. We on these benches commend those choices, and I commend this statement to the House.
We're watching, of course, live pictures from the House of Commons. We've just been listening to the UK Chancellor. She has been delivering her first budget, and there was a lot of detail in there, wasn't there? There were the tax increases that largely we had been expecting, at least in the areas we've been expecting them, but perhaps not as much have been expected in some places. We're just getting some information coming through from the Debt Office in the UK around gilt sales, so we'll add that into the mix. A lot to digest, from the fiscal rules and the way they're changing to the increases in taxes. Let's get some analysis now. Lizzie Burden is standing outside Parliament. Lizzie, what stood out to you?
Well, Anna, this is, as you say, the first Labour budget in over 14 years, and it fundamentally grows the British state. It's one of the biggest ever tax-raising budgets in British history, hiking taxes by £40 billion. So lots of it was well-trailed. To raise tax revenue, she's going to increase the rate of employer national insurance contributions, raise capital gains tax, freeze inheritance tax thresholds, but there were also giveaways, some of them surprises. She froze fuel duty next year. She removed the freeze on income tax thresholds, so phasing out fiscal drag. And for businesses, she lowered business rates for retail and hospitality companies. Now, on the spending side, she raised day-to-day spending by 1.5% in real terms. That's notably less than the 2% that was expected, so it could feel like austerity. It could go down down like a lead balloon in some parts of her party, even if she raised NHS funding by the most since 2010 outside COVID. And finally, as well trailed, she changed the fiscal rules to borrow more to invest. It's the 10th iteration of the fiscal rules since 1997. So overall, the OBR says that it is going to boost growth marginally, falling short of the 2% target though, and you can debate how much of that is down to this budget, if this is actually a growth boosting budget. But Anna, markets taking it in their stride. It doesn't appear to be a Liz Truss moment.
Yes, markets taking it in their stride, Lizzie. Good way to sum it up, and a lot of noise in the background there. But thank you for dealing with that, Bloomberg's UK correspondent Lizzie Burden. We're watching Sunak, then the leader of the opposition, taking to his feet. John Stepek joins us, the Bloomberg Wealth team, writer of the newsletter. Big takeaways then. We haven't got much time, unfortunately, John, but around income tax, around and freezing the thresholds there, and then increasing taxes in some of the areas we were watching for.
I think the main one's employer national insurance. So that's gone up by a lot, so 13.8 to 15%. And they've dropped the threshold at which it kicks in from 9,100 to 5,000. Now, if you want to be very legalistic about your manifesto, then you can say that that's not kind of breaking the manifesto promise. But at the end of the day, I think most economists would accept that in terms of tax incidence, as in who this falls on, this will reduce wages over the longer term. Because the money's got to come from somewhere, and it's a substantial amount of money. This has been her big thing. On the flip side,
yes,
she didn't extend the freeze on, the Tories have frozen income tax thresholds up to 2028. She was kind of expected to do it till 2030 because that's sort of a painless way to have technically raised money. But she quite cleverly decided not to do that because, of course, at any point in the next 5 years, she can extend it further. The inheritance tax move was pretty interesting as well. I think that, I guess, in an interesting kind of way, nothing was as bad as it could have been.
Yes, and that's what we seem to see some of the stocks reacting to today.
Yes,
so even in areas where we thought there might have been increased taxation, if there was, it wasn't as bad as expected. So, for example, AIM stocks.
Well, AIM's a good one, It was, there was a risk that it would go straight up to 40%. As it stands, it sounds as if it's going to be 20%. And on holdings over a certain amount. Need to check small print on that one, but if they're tying it in with business, property and agricultural relief, then that's what it sounds like.
Yes, no doubt they'll be hoping the headlines tomorrow morning in the UK papers are around 1p off a pint of draft, crucially beer. But we'll wait to see if they get what they wished for there. John, thank you very much. Thanks for joining us. John Stepek from Bloomberg Wealth with an update on what caught his eye, and Lizzie Burden before that with a comprehensive rundown of the things we heard from the Chancellor. Certainly discouraging us from making any comparisons with the last Tory budget here, talking about this being a budget to invest. That's it for the budget special. This is Bloomberg.
Joe Walk is helping steer J&J into a new phase of its history, expanding the frontiers of healthcare by discovering drugs and advancing medical technology.
Developing digital robotic capabilities where it's not just the robot doing a surgical procedure. It's garnering information from that procedure for your specific demographic or the patient's demographic, and then informing the next procedure down the road. Right? It's getting smarter. I would say it's starting to morph into personalized medicine, which we know will lead to the best outcomes.
Innovative medicine and medtech are run as separate business divisions, but in the culture of research at J&J, they interact.
If you look at some of the spaces that we're in today, specifically oncology, there is a lot of dialogue going back and forth. I think it's something that will position us extremely well as we talk about not only a continuum of care, but also a continuum of knowledge.
The convergence of technology and medicine is driving innovation in both sectors, with scientific and commercial possibilities just beginning to come into focus.
I'd like to actually see some partnerships down the road happen between healthcare companies and technology companies. I think we'd get to better outcomes faster if we did that. Right now, technology companies don't have the healthcare knowledge. Healthcare companies probably don't have the breadth of knowledge they need for technology. If we can figure that out together with great minds from both sides, I think that leads to a much better place.
Every single thing I've done it's almost as if somebody has said it can't be done. I mean, I remember I was in a factory and I said, I want to go in the night shift. And they said, no, we don't put women in the night shift. I said, how will I be a successful production manager or personal manager of a factory if I never went into a night shift and knew how a third of my people worked? So in some ways it has fueled some of my determination. It's fueled some of my, okay, I'm going to show this is possible, a sense of I'm going to go get on and do it. It also gives me courage because I feel sometimes I'm not just doing it for me, I'm doing it for everyone else who comes after me. And I always tell women who ask me for advice saying, put your hand up for the most difficult job. Put your hand up for things that are challenging. You know, go in there and lean into things that are difficult, that are challenging, because that's what gives you the greatest credibility, respect, reputation.
The names that move markets are on Bloomberg.
At the moment, we are not totally unhappy with what we see. It looks very much that inflation is on the right track of disinflation. You know, we come from very high numbers, as high on average for the whole of the euro area as 10.6%. And the latest reading we